The night the dead awoke. I'll never forget that dreadful night last October when the souls of the dead began to stir in the ancient cemetery behind my house. It was a week before Halloween, and my friends Brandon and Stacy had been nagging me to go on one of those cheesy ghost tours with them in the old part of town. I had been dismissive of the whole idea, scoffing at what I considered an obvious money grab for gullible tourists. Little did I know the horrors that were about to unfold. "Come on, Matt, it'll be fun," Stacy pleaded over beers at my place. "The graveyard they take you to is supposed to be haunted as hell. People have seen all sorts of weird stuff there over the years." I rolled my eyes. "You two actually buy into that ghost garbage? It's all made up by tour companies to sell tickets." Brandon laughed. Says the guy whose house is basically inside an ancient cemetery. "You're braver than I thought, living there all by yourself." He was right. My little rental house from the 1920s abutted a very old, run-down cemetery that dated back to the colonial days. The graveyard was thick with crooked headstones, scraggly trees, and overgrown bushes. At night, it did admittedly have an eerie vibe. But I'd lived here for over a year and never seen anything otherworldly, despite Brandon's attempts to creep me out. "Look, just come with us this Saturday night," Stacy persisted. "If you make it through the whole tour without getting freaked out, drinks are on me." I relented, unable to resist a free beer. "Fine, you're on. But I'm telling you, it's gonna be a snooze fest." Little did I know how mistaken I was. How I wish I could return to the blissful ignorance of my former skepticism. The night of the ghost tour, the three of us arrived at the meeting spot downtown, along with around 20 other thrill seekers. Our guide was an overly dramatic young man who introduced himself as Roderick. Dressed in full vampire garb, he launched into his prepared spiel about the sordid history of the town and its connections to the occult dating back centuries. I zoned out for most of it, looking around skeptically as Roderick droned on and on. The person I noticed most was a strange old woman dressed in black rags, her face obscured by a tattered shawl. She stood silently among the group, seemingly ignored by everyone else. I made brief eye contact with her piercing eyes, which sent an unsettling chill down my spine. Eventually, Roderick raised his arms for dramatic effect. "And now, we shall journey into the darkness, to the place where the unliving dwell." He turned with a flourish of his cape and led our group down narrow side streets toward the old cemetery behind my house. As we approached the arched entrance, he halted us. "Beyond this gate lies a place of unspeakable evil," Roderick intoned in his put-on Transylvanian accent. "For it was here that the victims of the Blood March massacre were laid to rest, their souls perverted and twisted by the foul rites of Kalos Rem, the Demon Keeper." I stifled a laugh at the ridiculousness of it all. Blood March massacre? Demon Keeper? This guy was working way too hard to hype this up. "Tread lightly, mortals," Roderick continued, his voice taking on a somber tone. "For it is said that on the night before All Hallows Eve, the vengeful spirits are at their most unrestful." With that, he swung open the creaking gate and led us inside the cemetery grounds. The crescent moon overhead bathed the area in an eerie half-light. Tilted headstones and crooked monuments stretched out in every direction, covered in moss and grime from centuries of neglect. The group stuck close together, following the narrow path winding through the graveyard. As we delved deeper into the cemetery, Roderick stopped occasionally to tell increasingly lurid tales of tragedy, murder, and supernatural vengeance. I have to admit, even my rational mind began feeling unsettled by the pervasive atmosphere of dread and decay surrounding us. At one point, Roderick cautioned us to remain on the path and avoid wandering near the crumbling old mausoleums. For that is where the defilers gather to practice their obscene rituals, he said ominously. I felt a slight chill as I noticed the strange old woman from before seemed to have drifted much closer to our group, almost blending in with us as we walked. Something about her presence felt deeply off, in a way I couldn't articulate. We turned a corner, and I caught my breath as we came upon a large, open area with a horrifying sight. Dozens of bodies strewn across the ground, in contorted positions. They appeared freshly dead, their vacant eyes staring sightlessly at the night sky. "Oh my God!" A woman's scream cut through the shocked murmurs, rippling through the crowd. People scattered in a panic as Roderick theatrically threw his arms up. "Stay on the path, you fools," he bellowed. "These are merely charnel works, masterful recreations designed to stoke your fears." As I peered closer, I realized the bodies were in fact incredibly realistic props or statues set up for maximum shock value. A couple brave souls ventured off the path and even prodded them, confirming they were simply made of wax or plaster. "Nice one, Roderick," I muttered, rejoining the path as the group came to its senses, amid nervous laughter and a few shaken individuals vowing to turn back. As we pressed on, Brandon leaned over with a wry grin. "Having fun yet?" Stacy rolled her eyes at his sarcasm, but I had to admit, the tour was more intense than I expected. We passed by a particularly old, decrepit mausoleum with a crumbling stone facade. An iron door hung awkwardly ajar, the depths beyond swallowed in blackness. I did a double take, as I thought I saw something move near the entrance. A pale, twisted face seemed to materialize from the shadows and leer at me with sunken eyes and a leering grin. "What the hell?" I gasped in shock, but it was gone in an instant, leaving me doubting if I'd truly seen anything at all. The strange old woman abruptly appeared at my side, making me jump. "Beware what Kalos wrought," she rasped in a dry, papery voice, like dislodged leaves scattering across pavement. Before I could react, she shuffled off after the crowd with an unnatural quickness. A shiver ran down my spine as I stood there, rooted to the spot by a sudden frisson of primal fear. "Keep up, you'd be ghost spotter," Roderick's mocking voice cut through my trance. I shook my head to regain my composure and hurried to catch up with the group. As we neared the rear of the sprawling cemetery, Roderick stopped once more with a raised hand. "We have now arrived at the place of deepest dread, the Gorewood Path. For it was here that the Blood March claimed its final victims before the Demon Keeper was undone." The path opened into a nightmarish clearing, ringed by twisted, gnarled trees, with their branches intertwining in a horrific way that seemed to suggest agonized human forms frozen in place. In the center of the glade stood an ancient basalt obelisk covered in bizarre, indecipherable carvings. A thick, unnatural fog began rolling across the glade, casting everything in an ominous haze. Roderick shot us a conspiratorial look before grandly gesturing to the obelisk. "Gaze upon the pillar of Kalyuji-Rem, the unholy altar where Kalos the Demon Keeper sacrificed the souls of 200 innocents in his pursuit of immortality. It was here where he perverted the boundaries between life and death through forbidden blood rituals." His voice took on a darker tone, as if truly believing the bullshit mythology he was spinning. And it was here, in the unwholesome depths of Gorewood, that the Blood March reached its grisly climax. For you see, the vengeful spirits slaughtered by Kalos still linger, waiting to be reunited with their mortal husks on the night before Samhain. A young woman near the front let out a shrill scream, cutting Roderick off as she pointed a trembling finger at the obelisk. I followed her gaze and felt the blood drain from my face. One of the bodies from earlier was there, draped grotesquely over the top of the pillar, its spine bent at an obscene angle. But this time, it was undeniably real, the glassy eyes frozen open and mouth agape in a silent scream of agony. Shrieks and commotion erupted as people began scrambling in panic. I remained rooted in place, too stunned by the macabre sight to react. That's when I noticed them, shadowy figures emerging from the swirling mists, drifting eerily between the gnarled trees. As they drew closer, I saw their forms were humanoid but disturbingly warped and twisted, like watching a reflection in a carnival funhouse mirror. The creatures' anguished faces kept shifting between looks of unspeakable torment and sadistic glee. Worst of all were their eyes, completely devoid of anything resembling a soul, just endless pits of hatred and malice. The unquiet graves. I heard Roderick's stunned whisper beside me, all bravado gone from his voice. They're walking again. One of the shadow beings turned toward us, locking its soulless gaze upon me. A rattling, garbled sound, like a drowning victim's dying breath, issued from its rent maw. He returns. The words slithered into my mind, overriding my senses with a psychic force that seared my brain with blinding agony. Clutching my skull, I fell to my knees, vaguely aware of the others in our group also collapsing in convulsions around me. Only Roderick and the strange old woman remained standing amid the swirling chaos. Mother Darkness, forgive me. Roderick's plaintive cry barely registered as I writhed on the ground. I watched in horror through a haze of blinding pain as the shadow entities converged on the old woman. Their forms seemed to shift and distort, combining into a towering aberration, nearly 20 feet tall. What occurred next will be seared into my memory for the rest of my days on this forsaken planet. In a series of grotesque undulations, the amalgamated monstrosity reformed itself into a vaguely humanoid shape. An echoing basso rumble shook the ground as the being spoke in a tongue I cannot put words to, its voice like an earthquake swallowing worlds. The transformed old woman raised her arms in ecstatic fealty as a sickly amber glow began enveloping her shriveled frame. The last thing I remember was the terrible, high-pitched laughter of the resurrected demon keeper Kalos, piercing my mind like white-hot adamantine before my vision mercifully faded to black.